The first thing Marcus Bradley noticed wasn't the girl lying motionless in the snow. It wasn't even the dark red stain spreading beneath her pale form like spilled wine on white linen. What stopped him dead in his tracks that bitter February morning was the glint of gold catching the early sunlight, a locket clutched so tightly in her frozen fingers that her knuckles had turned translucent white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had been walking this stretch of abandoned railway for 3 years, ever since his divorce, using the solitude to clear his head before his shifts at the steel mill. He'd seen plenty of strange things along these forgotten tracks: old hobos camping in the brush, teenagers spray painting the rusted rail cars, even a family of deer that had made their home in the overgrown weeds. But he'd never seen anything like this. The girl couldn't have been more than 16. Her raven black hair fanned out against the pristine snow like ink spilled across paper. Her skin was pale as porcelain, lips tinged blue from the cold. She wore a thin cotton dress that offered no protection against the brutal Indiana winter, white with tiny purple flowers, the kind of thing you'd wear to a summer picnic, not a February morning when the temperature hovered near zero. But it was that locket that made Marcus's blood run cold. Because as he knelt beside her still form, checking for any sign of life, he recognized it. The intricate rose pattern etched into the gold surface, the tiny chip on the left side where it had been dropped years ago, the delicate chain that had been mended with a small silver link. Marcus had given that exact locket to someone 23 years ago. Someone who was supposed to be buried in Greenwood Cemetery, 3 towns over. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached toward the girl's neck, searching for a pulse. Her skin was cold as marble, but there, faint and thready, he felt the whisper of life still coursing through her veins. She was alive, barely, but alive. "Jesus," he whispered, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "What happened to you?" The girl's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might wake up. Instead, her grip on the locket tightened, and she murmured something so softly he had to lean closer to hear. "Sarah, ... She breathed, the name barely audible. "Tell Sarah ... Marcus felt the world tilt around him. Sarah, that was the name of the girl he'd given the locket to all those years ago. Sarah Mitchell, with her wild auburn curls and infectious laugh, who'd been his everything until that terrible night in 1999 when her car had skidded off Route 34 in a thunderstorm. They'd pulled her body from Willow Creek 2 days later, and Marcus had insisted she be buried wearing that locket. He'd attended the funeral. He'd watched them lower the casket into the ground. He'd stood there in the rain, wondering how he was supposed to go on without her. But here was that same locket, in the hands of a girl who looked young enough to be Sarah's daughter, if Sarah had lived to have children. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers stiff with cold as he dialed 911. While he waited for the ambulance, he studied the girl's face more carefully. There was something familiar about her features, the delicate curve of her nose, the way her dark eyebrows arched slightly at the ends. But it was impossible. Sarah had been an only child, and her parents had moved away after the funeral. 911. "What's your emergency?" "I found a girl by the old railway tracks off County Road 47, Marcus said, never taking his eyes off the unconscious teenager. "She's alive but barely conscious. Looks like she's been out here all night." "Is she responsive?" "Sir, barely. She's really cold. I think she might have hypothermia. We're dispatching an ambulance to your location now. Can you see any obvious injuries?" Marcus looked closer and noticed what he'd missed before in his shock over the locket. There was a gash on her forehead, mostly hidden by her hair, and her left wrist was swollen and bent at an odd angle. But more disturbing were the marks on her arms, thin, parallel lines that looked deliberate. "She's got a head injury and what looks like a broken wrist. he said into the phone. "And there are marks on her arms." The dispatcher's voice became more urgent. "Sir, I need you to stay with her until help arrives. Try to keep her warm if you can, but don't move her." Marcus shrugged out of his heavy winter coat and draped it over the girl's slight frame. As he did, her eyes opened suddenly, not the brown eyes he'd expected, but startling green ones that seemed to look right through him. "The locket," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "You know what it means." How do you know about the locket?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. "She told me you'd understand. She said you were the only one who would believe." "Who told you?" "Who are you talking about?" But the girl's eyes had already closed again, and she'd slipped back into unconsciousness. Marcus sat back on his heels, mind reeling. This had to be some kind of cruel joke or bizarre coincidence. People didn't come back from the dead. Lockets could be replicated. Someone was playing an elaborate trick on him, though he couldn't imagine who or why. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through his spiraling thoughts. As the ambulance approached, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of handing the locket over to the paramedics, he carefully pried it from the girl's frozen fingers and slipped it into his pocket. Whatever was happening here, he needed to understand it before anyone else got involved. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The paramedics worked quickly to stabilize the girl, wrapping her in heated blankets and starting in 4. Marcus rode with them to St. Mary's Hospital, claiming to be the one who found her, which was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. At the hospital, Marcus paced the waiting room while doctors worked to bring the girl's body temperature back to normal. A police officer, Detective Raymond Kowalski, according to his badge, sat down beside him with a notepad. "Mr. Bradley, can you tell me exactly how you found the girl this morning?" Marcus recounted his story, leaving out the details about the locket. He described his regular walks along the railway, finding her in the snow, calling 911. Detective Kowalski took notes and asked follow-up questions about whether Marcus had seen anyone else in the area, any vehicles, anything suspicious. "Has she said anything about what happened to her?" Kowalski asked. "She was mostly unconscious. Said something about someone named Sarah, but that's all I could make out." The detective nodded. "We'll need to wait until she's stable to get a proper statement. In the meantime, we're treating this as a potential assault case. Those injuries didn't happen by accident." After the detective left, Marcus found himself alone with his thoughts and the weight of the locket in his pocket. He pulled it out and examined it closely under the harsh fluorescent lights. Every detail was exactly as he remembered. The tiny scratches from years of wear, the way the clasp caught slightly when you tried to open it, even the faint discoloration on the chain where Sarah's perfume had touched it night after night. With shaking fingers, he pressed the small release mechanism. The locket sprang open, revealing the 2 photographs inside. On the right was the picture of himself at age 19, grinning at the camera with the confidence of someone who believed the world was full of endless possibilities. On the left should have been Sarah's picture, the one he'd carefully cut to fit the oval frame. Instead, there was a photograph of the girl he'd found by the tracks. Marcus nearly dropped the locket. The photograph was old, the edges slightly yellowed with age, but it was definitely the same girl. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same delicate features. But that was impossible. This locket had been buried with Sarah in 1999. The girl in the hospital couldn't have been more than a toddler then. "Excuse me, are you the gentleman who found the young lady?" Marcus looked up to see a doctor in scrubs approaching. He quickly snapped the locket shut and slipped it back into his pocket. "Yes, I'm Marcus Bradley. How is she?" "She's stable now. We've managed to bring her core temperature back to normal, and we've treated her injuries. The head wound required several stitches, and her wrist was indeed broken. We've set it in a cast." "Is she awake?" "In and out." She's been asking for someone named Marcus, actually. I assume that's you? Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February weather. She asked for me by name? She seems quite concerned about speaking with you. Would you like to see her? Just for a few minutes. She needs her rest. Marcus followed the doctor down a sterile hallway to a private room. The girl was awake now, propped up against white pillows, looking small and fragile in the oversized hospital gown. Her green eyes tracked to him the moment he entered the room. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was Sarah's voice, the same. Slight rasp, the same cadence. "I knew you'd be the one to find me. How do you know my name? Who are you?" "My name is Emma," she said. "Emma Caldwell. And I have a message from Sarah Mitchell." The room seemed to spin around Marcus. "That's not possible. Sarah's been dead for 23 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Emma smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, lopsided and mischievous. "Death isn't always the end, Marcus. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a longer journey. You're just a kid. You couldn't have known Sarah. I know she used to call you her steel mill prince because you worked so hard to save money for her engagement ring. I know she loved cherry pie, but only if it was made with real cherries, not the canned ones. I know she had a scar on her knee from when she fell off her bike trying to impress Tommy Henderson in 3rd grade. Marcus sank into the chair beside her bed. These weren't things you could look up online or piece together from old newspaper articles. These were intimate details, the kind of things only Sarah would have known. "I know she regrets leaving you the way she did," Emma continued, her voice growing softer. "She regrets that last fight you had about the wedding plans. She wants you to know it was never about the money or the size of the ceremony. She was just scared." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. The last conversation he'd had with Sarah had indeed been an argument about their wedding. She'd wanted something small and simple. He'd insisted on throwing a big celebration to show everyone how much he loved her. They'd both said things they regretted, and she'd stormed out into that thunderstorm without giving him a chance to apologize. "How can you possibly know all this?" Emma reached out with her uninjured hand and touched his arm. Her skin was warm, now no longer the cold marble he'd felt by the tracks. "Because she's been watching over you all these years, Marcus. She's seen how you blame yourself for what happened. She's seen how you push everyone away because you're afraid of losing them too. This is impossible. People don't come back from the dead to deliver messages, don't they?" Emma's eyes seemed to look right into his soul. "Haven't you felt her presence sometimes? Late at night when you're walking those railway tracks, haven't you sensed that you weren't alone?" Marcus couldn't deny it. There had been times over the years when he'd felt a familiar warmth, a sense that Sarah was nearby. He'd always attributed it to wishful thinking and grief, but now— "She sent me to give you this," Emma said, holding up her hand. For a moment, Marcus thought she was referring to the locket, but then he saw what she was actually showing him, a small silver ring on her pinky finger. It was Sarah's promise ring, the one he'd given her when they were 16. The one that should have been buried with her body. "She wants you to have it back," Emma said, working the ring off her finger. "She says it's time for you to let her go. Time for you to live again." Marcus stared at the ring, his hands shaking. "I don't understand any of this. How are you here? Why now?" Emma pressed the ring into his palm, her green eyes never leaving his face. "Because yesterday was the anniversary, Marcus. 23 years to the day since the accident. And because there's something else she needs you to know." "What?" "She wasn't alone in the car that night." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might pass out right there in the sterile hospital room. "What do you mean she wasn't alone?" Emma's green eyes filled with tears that seemed far too old for her 16-year-old face. There was a baby, Marcus. Sarah was 3 months pregnant when she died. The room tilted sideways. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. That's impossible. The autopsy ... They would have found ... They did find it, Emma whispered. But Sarah's father made sure it was kept quiet. He paid the coroner and threatened the medical examiner. He didn't want the scandal of his unmarried daughter being pregnant. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. Richard Mitchell had never liked him, had made it clear that his daughter deserved better than a steel mill worker with calloused hands and big dreams. But to hide something like this— "You're lying," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew she wasn't. Too many pieces were falling into place. Sarah's strange mood swings in those final weeks. Her sudden aversion to coffee, the way she'd been touching her stomach when she thought he wasn't looking. She was going to tell you that night, Emma continued. That's why she wanted to postpone the wedding. She was scared about how you'd react, worried you'd think she was trying to trap you. Marcus buried his face in his hands. The fight they'd had suddenly took on a completely different meaning. Sarah hadn't been having second thoughts about marrying him. She'd been trying to figure out how to tell him they were going to be parents. She drove off into that storm because she couldn't find the courage to say the words, Emma said softly. She spent her last moments on Earth regretting that she'd never told you about your child, my child. The words felt foreign in Marcus's mouth. All these years, he'd not only lost the woman he loved, he'd lost a son or daughter he'd never even known existed. She named her Elena, Emma said. In her heart, she knew it was a girl, and she'd already picked out the name. Elena Marie Bradley. Marcus looked up sharply. Bradley? But we weren't married yet. She was planning to take your name anyway. She'd already started practicing her signature, Sarah Bradley, Mrs. Marcus Bradley. She had pages and pages of it hidden in her diary. A sob escaped Marcus's throat despite his best efforts to contain it. How do you know all this? How is any of this possible? Emma shifted in the hospital bed, wincing as her broken wrist bumped against the rail. Because I'm not just delivering Sarah's message, Marcus. I am the message. What does that mean? It means Elena Marie Bradley didn't die with her mother that night in 1999. It means she was given a second chance. Born to different parents in a different time, but carrying the soul and memories of who she was meant to be. Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. You're telling me you're my daughter? I'm telling you that souls don't always follow the rules we think they do. When Elena died before she could live, she was given another path. Born as Emma Caldwell to parents who couldn't love her the way she deserved, carrying the weight of memories from a life she never got to live. The girl in the hospital bed suddenly looked different to Marcus. He studied her face with new eyes, searching for traces of himself and Sarah. The shape of her nose was Sarah's, but the stubborn set of her jaw, that was pure Bradley. Her green eyes were exactly the shade of his mother's. The grandmother Elena would never have met. The Caldwells, Marcus said slowly. Your adoptive parents? Emma's expression darkened. Foster parents. I've been in the system since I was 6. My birth mother died of an overdose. Birth father was never in the picture. I've been bounced from home to home ever since. Is that how you got those marks on your arms? Emma pulled the hospital blanket higher, trying to hide the thin scars. Marcus had noticed by the tracks. Some families are better than others. The Hendersons were ... difficult. Marcus felt a rage building in his chest unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. Someone had hurt this girl, his daughter, if what she was saying was true. Someone had taken a child who'd already suffered the cosmic injustice of dying before birth and made her suffer more. Where are they now, the Hendersons? Foster's license was revoked 6 months ago, but not because of what they did to me. Because they got caught selling food stamps. I was moved to the Caldwells after that, but they're not much better. Just Different kinds of awful. And last night? How did you end up on those tracks? Emma's hands twisted in the blanket. Mrs. Caldwell accused me of stealing $20 from her purse. She didn't believe me when I said I didn't take it. She locked me outside in the cold as punishment, said I could come back in when I was ready to tell the truth. In that thin dress in February? She threw my winter coat in the trash 2 weeks ago. Said I didn't deserve nice things if I couldn't. Be grateful for what I had. Marcus felt his hands clenching into fists. So you walked to the railway tracks? I've been having dreams about those tracks for months. Dreams where a man with kind eyes finds me there and everything changes. When? I realized I was going to freeze to death on the Caldwell's porch. I remembered the dreams and started walking. You walked 15 miles in the snow? I had to. The dreams showed me that you'd be there this morning, walking like you do every day at sunrise. I had to trust that the universe would get me there in time. Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. Even if he accepted the impossible explanation Emma was offering, there were still so many questions. The locket. How did you get Sarah's locket? I've had it since I was little. It was the only thing they found with my birth mother when she died. The social workers assumed it was hers, so they let me keep it. I've worn it every day since I was old enough to understand what it meant, but it was buried with Sarah. I was there. I saw them close the casket. Emma smiled sadly. You saw them close a casket with a replica inside. Her father switched them out before the funeral. He kept the real one, planning to sell it later when the grief died down. But when my birth mother was living on the streets, pregnant and desperate, she broke into the Mitchell house looking for something to pawn. The locket was the only thing small enough to hide before the police came. The story was becoming more complex by the minute, but it had an internal logic that Marcus found disturbingly believable. So Sarah's father knew the locket was gone? He reported it to the police as part of a burglary, but he never told them what it really was or why it mattered. Just listed it as miscellaneous jewelry on the insurance claim. Marcus pulled Sarah's locket from his pocket and held it up to the light. Then this really is the same locket I gave her for her 18th birthday. Open it again, Emma said quietly. With trembling fingers, Marcus pressed the tiny clasp. The locket sprang open, revealing the 2 photographs inside. But now, instead of the impossible image of Emma he'd seen earlier, the left side held the photograph it was supposed to contain. Sarah's smiling face at 17, all auburn curls. And bright eyes. Marcus blinked hard and looked again. Sarah's photograph was definitely there, exactly as it should be. I don't understand. Before, there was a picture of you. Before, you weren't ready to see the truth. Sometimes the universe has to prepare us for revelations that are too big to accept all at once. A knock on the hospital room door interrupted them. Detective Kowalski entered, notepad in hand, looking tired and frustrated. Miss, I'm Detective Kowalski with the county police. I need to ask you some questions about what happened to you last night. Emma glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. It's okay. Tell him the truth. For the next 20 minutes, Emma recounted her story about the Caldwells, the false accusation, being locked outside in the cold. Detective Kowalski took detailed notes, his expression growing increasingly grim. Miss Caldwell, these are serious allegations. If what you're telling me is true, the people who were supposed to be caring for you committed criminal negligence at minimum. Are you going to arrest them? We're going to investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, you can't go back to that home. We'll need to find you emergency placement. Marcus spoke up before he could stop himself. She can stay with me. Both Emma and Detective Kowalski turned to look at him in surprise. Mr. Bradley, Kowalski said carefully, that's very generous, but you're not an approved foster parent. There are procedures. Then what are the procedures? How do I become approved? It's a lengthy process. Background checks, home inspections, training courses. It could take months. Marcus looked at Emma, who was watching him with those impossibly green eyes. Then what happens to her in the meantime? Group home, most likely. Or we might be able to find a temporary placement with an existing foster family. More people who might hurt her. Detective Kowalski sighed. I understand your concern, Mr. Bradley, but the system has safeguards in place. Not all foster families are like the Caldwells and Hendersons. But some are, Marcus said firmly. And she's been through enough. After Detective Kowalski left to begin his investigation into the Caldwell household, Marcus found himself alone with Emma again. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the sterile room. You don't have to do this, Emma said quietly. You don't owe me anything just because of who I might be. Might be? Do you have doubts about what you told me? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just a damaged kid who's created an elaborate fantasy to make sense of a senseless world. Maybe I found out about Sarah and you through old newspaper articles and built a story around it. But you knew things that were never in any newspaper, private things. Or maybe I'm exactly who I think I am, the soul of your daughter, given a second chance at life, but born into circumstances that were almost as tragic as the first ones. Marcus studied her face in the golden afternoon light. Whether she was his biological daughter or just a girl who needed help, he knew he couldn't walk away. Something had brought them together by those railway tracks, and he wasn't going to ignore it. Either way, he said, you're not going back to people who hurt you. I don't care what it takes or how long the process is. We'll figure it out. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that for me? Marcus thought about all the years he'd spent walking those tracks, wondering what his life would have been like if Sarah had lived. Wondering what kind of father he would have been. What kind of man he might have become if he'd had someone to live for besides himself. Because 23 years ago, I lost the chance to protect the people I loved. I'm not going to lose it again. As if summoned by his words, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Visiting hours are almost over, sir. The patient needs her rest. Marcus stood to leave, but Emma caught his hand with her good one. Marcus, the dreams I mentioned, they don't end with you finding me by the tracks. What else do they show? They show danger coming. Someone who doesn't want the truth about Sarah's death to come out. Someone who has a lot to lose if people start asking questions about what really happened that night. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah's father? Among others. There were more people involved in covering up the truth than you know. And they've built their lives on the foundation of that lie. What kind of danger? Emma's grip on his hand tightened. The kind that means we need to be very careful who we trust. The kind that means finding me was just the beginning of something much bigger and more dangerous than either of us imagined. Marcus spent that night in his empty house, staring at the ceiling and turning Emma's warnings over in his mind. Every creak of the old floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made him jump. He'd lived alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about someone else's safety. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sitting at his kitchen table with Sarah's locket and promise ring spread before him, he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The logical part of his brain insisted this was all an elaborate con game, a troubled teenager who'd researched his past and created a story designed to manipulate his emotions. But the part of him that had loved Sarah, the part that had never stopped grieving for what might have been, recognized something genuine in Emma's green eyes. Whether she was truly his daughter's soul reborn, or simply a girl who needed saving, she'd awakened something in him that had been dormant for decades. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed the hospital's number. Mr. Bradley? This is Dr. Patterson at St. Mary's. I'm calling about Emma Caldwell. Marcus's heart stopped. What's wrong? Is she okay? She's physically fine, but there's been an incident. Someone tried to enter her room around midnight. Security cameras caught a man in scrubs attempting to access the locked ward we're keeping her for observation. Did they catch him? He fled when the night nurse questioned his credentials. The strange thing is, he had hospital ID that looked authentic, but when we checked the employee database, no one by that name works here. Marcus was already reaching for his car keys. I'm on my way. Mr. Bradley, there's something else. Emma is asking for you, and she seems agitated. She keeps saying someone's coming and that you're both in danger. 20 minutes later, Marcus was rushing through the hospital corridors. He found Emma sitting up in bed, wide awake despite the early hour. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. You came, she said, relief flooding her voice. Of course I came. Are you hurt? No, but he was here, the man from my dreams. The one who helped cover up the truth about Sarah. Marcus sat down beside her bed. Tell me exactly what happened. I couldn't sleep, so I was looking out the window. Around midnight, I saw a black sedan pull into the parking lot. A man got out, tall, gray hair, expensive suit, even at that hour. He looked up at the hospital windows like he was searching for something. You could see him clearly from the 4th floor. The parking lot lights were bright, and there was something about him that made me pay attention. He moved like someone used to being obeyed, someone powerful. What happened next? About 20 minutes later, someone tried to come into my room. A man in scrubs, but his shoes were wrong. Expensive leather dress shoes, not the comfortable sneakers the real nurses wear. When I pretended to be asleep, he came closer to my bed. Marcus felt his blood pressure rising. What did he want? He was looking at my chart, taking pictures of it with his phone. Then he started examining the locket. I was wearing it under my hospital gown. When his fingers touched it, I felt this electric shock, like the locket was trying to protect itself. That's when the nurse came in? No, that's when I opened my eyes and looked right at him. Marcus, I knew his face. I've seen it in dreams for years. He was there the night Sarah died. Marcus leaned forward. What do you mean he was there? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. He was the one who found her car in the creek. He was the one who made sure the pregnancy was covered up. And he was the one who convinced her father to keep quiet about it. How could you possibly know that? Because when our eyes met, something passed between us. The same way I could access Sarah's memories, I could suddenly see his. Just fragments, but enough to understand. Emma closed her eyes, as if trying to recall a difficult dream. His name is Dr. Vincent Hartwell. He was the emergency room physician who treated Sarah when they brought her in. But he wasn't just doing his job, he was protecting someone else. Someone who couldn't afford to have Sarah's pregnancy become public knowledge. Who? Someone she'd been seeing before she got back together with you. Someone married, someone prominent in the community. Someone who paid Dr. Hartwell very well to make sure that secret died with Sarah. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Sarah was seeing someone else? It was brief, and it was over before she came back to you. But she wasn't sure whose baby she was carrying. The timing made it possible that it wasn't yours. The hospital room seemed to spin around Marcus. So all of this, Elena, you, the dreams, it might not even be connected to me? Emma reached out and took his hand. Marcus, listen to me. I felt the connection between us the moment I saw you. DNA doesn't determine the bonds between souls. Whether Elena was biologically yours or not doesn't change the fact that Sarah loved you, planned to marry you, wanted to build a life with you. But if the baby wasn't mine, then she was still your daughter in every way that mattered. Sarah chose you. She was going to tell you about the pregnancy and ask you to raise the child as your own, regardless of genetics. Marcus absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with everything he thought he knew about their relationship. Who was the other man? Someone with enough influence to make a small-town doctor falsify medical records, and convince a grieving father to stay silent for over 2 decades. But Dr. Hartwell is still alive, still protecting this secret, and still willing to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose it. Marcus, when he looked at me tonight, I saw his memories of other people who'd asked too many questions over the years. A private investigator who was looking into Sarah's death 5 years ago. He died in a car accident. A nurse who worked in the morgue and noticed discrepancies in Sarah's autopsy report. She moved away suddenly after receiving anonymous threats. Marcus stood up and began pacing the small room. We need to go to the police. With what evidence? My dreams and visions? They'll think I'm traumatized and delusional. Then what do you suggest? Emma was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the pre-dawn darkness. There's someone else who knows the truth. Someone who's been carrying the guilt for 23 years. Sarah's father? No, someone closer to the situation. Someone who was there that night and has been living with the consequences ever since. Before Marcus could ask for clarification, Emma's expression changed. Her eyes widened, and she gripped his hand tightly. "He's coming back," she whispered, "right now. I can feel him in the building." Marcus looked toward the door, where the security guard had been stationed earlier. The hallway beyond was empty and dark. Where's the guard? Dr. Hartwell would know how to get rid of security. He works in hospitals. He knows the routines, the blind spots. Marcus pulled out his phone to call 911, but Emma stopped him. "There's no time, and he'll be gone before they arrive. We need to leave, now. You can't leave the hospital. You're still a patient. I can walk and I'm not safe here. Marcus, please, trust me." Something in her voice convinced him. He helped Emma out of bed, supporting her as she slipped her feet into the hospital slippers. She was wearing the thin hospital gown, so Marcus grabbed a blanket from the bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. They made their way quietly down the hallway, avoiding the main elevators and heading for the emergency stairwell. As they reached the stairs, Marcus heard the elevator ding behind them. Someone was coming up to the 4th floor. They descended quickly but carefully, Emma's broken wrist making it difficult for her to grip the handrail. When they reached the ground floor, Marcus peered through the stairwell window into the lobby. A man in a white coat was speaking with the night security desk, showing some kind of identification. "That's him," Emma breathed. "Dr. Hartwell." Marcus studied the man's profile. He was indeed tall and distinguished looking, with silver hair and an air of authority. Everything about him suggested wealth and influence, the kind of person who was accustomed to getting his way. "How do we get out without him seeing us?" Emma pointed toward a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," the loading dock. "I saw it on a fire safety diagram in my room." They slipped through the door and found themselves in a service corridor that led to the hospital's receiving area. Marcus's truck was in the main parking lot, but Dr. Hartwell would see them if they tried to reach it. "There," Emma said, pointing to an ambulance parked near the loading dock. "The keys are probably inside. I can't steal an ambulance." "You're not stealing it. You're borrowing it to save our lives." Marcus hesitated, but the sound of footsteps in the corridor behind them made the decision for him. They climbed into the ambulance, and Marcus was relieved to find the keys in the ignition, a safety protocol that allowed emergency responders to move vehicles quickly if needed. As they pulled away from the hospital, Marcus saw Dr. Hartwell emerge from the loading dock entrance. The man stood under the sodium lights, watching the ambulance disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. "He knows it's us," Emma said, slumping back in the passenger seat. "Where do we go now?" "My house isn't safe if he knows who I am. We need to find the person I mentioned, the one who was there that night and has been carrying the guilt ever since. Who is it?" Emma looked at him with those ancient green eyes. "The person who was driving the other car." Marcus nearly swerved off the road. "What other car?" Sarah didn't lose control because of the storm, Marcus. She swerved to avoid hitting someone who was driving erratically in the opposite lane. Someone who was drunk, someone who should have been arrested for vehicular manslaughter, but was protected by the same people who covered up the pregnancy. Jesus who? Judge Robert Thornfield's son. Michael Thornfield. He was 25 then, already had 2 DUI arrests that his father had made disappear. The night Sarah died, he was driving home from a bar, crossed the center line on that curve. Near Willow Creek. Marcus remembered Judge Thornfield, a powerful figure in county politics, the kind of man who could indeed make problems disappear for the right people. Sarah swerved to avoid a head-on collision and went off the embankment instead. Michael stopped his car, saw what had happened, and called his father instead of 911. By the time emergency responders arrived, Judge Thornfield had already coordinated with Dr. Hartwell to control the narrative. And Michael Thornfield has been living with that secret all this time? Living with it badly. He's been in and out of rehab for decades, can't maintain relationships, can't hold a job despite his father's connections. The guilt is destroying him. Where is he now? Emma closed her eyes, as if accessing some internal compass. There's a cabin on Lake Morrison, about 30 miles north of town. His family owns it, but Michael's been living there alone for the past 2 years. That's where we'll find him. As they drove through the empty countryside, Marcus tried to process everything he'd learned. The woman he'd loved had been keeping secrets from him. The accident that had destroyed his life had been caused by someone else's recklessness. And now, 23 years later, powerful people were still willing to kill to keep the truth buried. Emma, he said quietly, if we're right about all this, and we confront Michael Thornfield, what makes you think he'll help us? He's kept quiet this long. Because, Emma said, staring out at the lightning sky, in my dreams, I see him at Sarah's grave. Every year on the anniversary of her death. He brings white roses and asks for forgiveness. He's been waiting for someone to finally hold him accountable. And if Dr. Hartwell finds us before we can get to him. Emma turned to look at Marcus, and in the early morning light, she looked older than her 16 years, old enough to be the daughter he'd lost, wise enough to understand the dangerous game they were playing. Then we'd better hope that the connection between souls is stronger than the connections between powerful men with dark secrets. The cabin at Lake Morrison sat like a dark stain against the silver water, surrounded by bare trees that clawed at the gray morning sky. Marcus parked the stolen ambulance behind a cluster of pines, out of sight from the main road. The silence was complete, except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Are you sure this is the right place? Marcus asked, studying the run-down structure through the windshield. Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. I can feel him in there. The guilt radiates from this place like heat from a fire. They approached the cabin carefully, Marcus supporting Emma as she navigated the uneven ground with her broken wrist. The building was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a sprawling log structure that had probably been impressive decades ago, but now showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the shutters, and several roof shingles lay scattered in the overgrown yard. Before they could knock, the front door opened. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and gaunt, with prematurely gray hair and hollow eyes. That spoke of decades of sleepless nights. He wore a rumpled flannel shirt and jeans that hung loosely on his thin frame. I've been expecting you, Michael Thornfield said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ever since I saw the news about a girl being found by the railway tracks. I knew this day would finally come. Marcus felt Emma's hand tighten on his arm. You know who we are? I know who she is, Michael said, his gaze fixed on Emma. She has Sarah's eyes. Different color, but the same soul looking out from behind them. They followed him into the cabin's main room, which was spartanly furnished but meticulously clean. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, Dozens of articles about fatal car accidents, drunk driving incidents, and hit-and-run cases. In the center of it all was a framed photograph of Sarah, taken from her high school yearbook. "This is my penance," Michael said, gesturing at the wall. "Every morning I wake up and read about other people who've died, because someone like me made the choice to drive drunk. Every night I wonder how many lives I could have saved if I'd had the courage to tell the truth 23 years ago." Emma walked slowly around the room, studying the articles. "You've been tracking these accidents all this time? Sending anonymous donations to the families. It doesn't bring anyone back, but it's something." Michael slumped into a worn leather chair that looked like it had been his father's. "How much do you know?" Marcus remained standing, his body tense with barely controlled rage. "We know you crossed the center line that night. We know Sarah died because she swerved to avoid hitting you. We know your father and Dr. Hartwell covered it up. And we know about the pregnancy," Emma added quietly. Michael's face crumpled. "That's the part that's haunted me the most. When they pulled her from the water, I heard Dr. Hartwell talking to my father. They thought I was too drunk to understand what they were saying, but I remember every word." "Tell us exactly what happened." "That night," Marcus said. Michael stared at the photograph on the wall for a long moment before speaking. "I'd been at Mulligan's bar since about 6 that evening. Lost my job that week, another one my father had gotten for me that I'd managed to screw up. I was angry, bitter, drowning my self-pity in whiskey." He rubbed his temples as if trying to massage away a persistent headache. "I should have called a cab. I should have stayed at the bar until I sobered up. Instead, I decided I was fine to drive. It was raining hard, visibility was terrible, and I was going too fast for the conditions." "What happened at the curve near Willow Creek?" "I came around that bend, and there was Sarah's car, right where it should have been, staying in its lane, but I drifted across the center line without realizing it. When our headlights hit each other, I saw her face for just a split second." Michael's voice broke. She was terrified. This beautiful young woman had her whole life ahead of her, and she was about to die because of my selfishness. Emma sat down on the couch across from him. "But she didn't hit you." "No." She jerked the wheel hard to the right, managed to avoid a head-on collision. Her car went off the embankment and down toward the creek. I slammed on my brakes, managed to get control of my car, and pulled over. "Did you try to help her?" Michael shook his head, shame written across his features. "I was too drunk to think clearly. Too scared to do the right thing. I called my father instead of 911, told him what had happened, begged him to fix it like he'd always fixed my mistakes before." Marcus felt his hands clenching into fists. "So you just left her down there to die while you waited for Daddy to make it all go away?" "I climbed down to check on her," Michael said defensively, then his voice dropped. "But she was already unconscious, trapped in the car. The creek was rising fast from the storm. I tried to get the door open, but it was jammed. I wasn't strong wasn't sober enough to save her. So you gave up." I panicked. My father arrived about 10 minutes later with Dr. Hartwell. They'd worked together before in delicate situations. Dad's political career had required a few inconvenient problems to disappear over the years. Emma leaned forward. "What did they do?" Dr. Hartwell went down to examine Sarah while my father questioned me about exactly what had happened. When the doctor came back up, he told us she was dead. Said there was nothing anyone could have done. The impact had been too severe, but that wasn't true. Michael's voice became barely audible. "No. Years later, when I finally got sober for a while, I researched the accident report. Sarah didn't die from the impact. She drowned. If emergency responders had been called immediately, if someone had been able to get her out of that car... Marcus lunged forward, grabbing Michael by the shirt and hauling him to his feet. "You're telling me she could have been saved? That she and her baby died because you were too much of a coward to call for help?" "Marcus, stop," Emma said firmly. Violence won't change what happened. But Marcus was beyond reason. 23 years of grief and guilt poured out of him in a torrent of rage. Do you have any idea what you took from me? What did you took from the world? Michael didn't resist, didn't try to defend himself. I know. I've known every day since it happened. I've tried to kill myself 4 times over the years. Each time something stops me. Like I'm not allowed to escape until I've made amends. Emma stood up and gently placed her hand on Marcus's arm. The moment her skin touched his, he felt a strange calm wash over him. His grip on Michael's shirt loosened, and he stepped back. We're not here for revenge, Emma said. We're here because Dr. Hartwell tried to hurt me last night, and he'll keep trying until the truth comes out. The only way to stop him is to expose what really happened. Michael sank back into his chair, looking older than his 48 years. My father's been dead for 5 years. He took most of the details with him to the grave. But Dr. Hartwell is still alive, Marcus said, still protecting someone. The pregnancy, Michael said slowly, that wasn't about protecting me. That was about protecting someone else entirely. Emma's eyes widened. You know who the father might have been? I didn't then, but I figured it out later. Dr. Hartwell has been receiving monthly payments from the same source for over 2 decades. I hired a private investigator a few years ago, one of my attempts to gather enough evidence to finally confess publicly. What did you find? Michael stood up and walked to an old desk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a manila folder and handed it to Marcus. The payments come from a trust fund controlled by the Ashford family. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The Ashfords were one of the wealthiest families in the state, with business interests spanning everything from real estate to politics. Senator William Ashford, his son David, he was 32 in 1999, married to the daughter of another prominent political family. If it had come out that he'd gotten a young woman pregnant and then abandoned her, it would have destroyed both families' political ambitions, Emma finished. More than that, David Ashford was being groomed for a congressional run that year. His wife was 3 months pregnant with their first child at the same time Sarah was carrying hers. The scandal would have ended multiple careers and cost millions in lost political investments. Marcus studied the financial documents in the folder. The payments to Dr. Hartwell were substantial, enough to ensure his silence and comfortable retirement. How did Sarah meet David Ashford? She was working part-time at his family's country club that summer, saving money for college. According to what I could piece together, they had a brief affair that ended when she realized he was never going to leave his wife. And then she came back to you, Emma said to Marcus, probably hoping to put the whole thing behind her and build a real life with someone who actually loved her, Michael continued. But when she discovered she was pregnant, she couldn't be sure who the father was. Emma walked to the window overlooking the lake. Dr. Hartwell falsified the autopsy to hide the pregnancy, which protected both David Ashford and Judge Thornfield's son. Everyone got what they wanted except Sarah and the baby. And me, Marcus said quietly. I got 23 years of blaming myself for her death. A sound outside made them all freeze, the distant rumble of a car engine approaching the cabin. Michael moved to the window and peered through the curtains. Black sedan, just like you described, he said, his face pale. Dr. Hartwell found us. Marcus looked around the cabin, calculating their options. They were trapped. The lake was behind them, and the only road out led directly past the approaching car. Is there another way out of here? Boat dock behind the cabin, Michael said. But the boat's been winterized. It'll take time to get it running. The engine sounds were getting closer. Emma grabbed Marcus's hand, and again he felt that strange calm wash over him. There's something else, she said urgently. Something I haven't told you about the dreams. What? This confrontation with Dr. Hartwell. It's not just about stopping him. It's about Sarah finally getting justice. But someone doesn't survive. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Who? Before Emma could answer, they heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, they could see Dr. Hartwell approaching the cabin, but he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, professional-looking. Individuals who moved with the practiced ease of people accustomed to violence. "Michael," Dr. Hartwell called out, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "I know you're in there. And I know you have visitors. Let's all have a civilized conversation about this situation." Michael looked at Marcus and Emma with haunted eyes. "I've been running from this moment for 23 years. Maybe it's time to stop running." "That's not your choice to make anymore," Marcus said. "This involves all of us now." Emma was still staring out the window, her expression distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the present moment. "In the dreams," she whispered, "I see fire, I see water, and I see someone finally telling the truth." The sound of footsteps on the cabin's front porch made them all turn toward the door. Dr. Hartwell's voice came again, closer now and more menacing. "Michael, you've caused enough trouble over the years. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Send the girl out, and we can discuss terms." Marcus moved protectively in front of Emma. "We're not sending anyone anywhere." Through the window, they could see one of Dr. Hartwell's companions circling toward the back of the cabin, while the other remained by the car, apparently standing guard. "They're surrounding us," Michael said unnecessarily. Emma suddenly gripped Marcus's arm. "The locket. Give me Sarah's locket." "Why?" "Because sometimes the only way to fight the darkness is to shine a light so bright that everyone has to see the truth." As Marcus pulled the locket from his pocket, Emma's eyes took on an otherworldly glow that reminded him of Sarah in her most determined moments. "What are you planning to do?" "What Sarah would have done if she'd lived long enough," Emma said. "Fight back." Emma held Sarah's locket in her palm, and as she did, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the windows despite the morning sun, and their breath became visible in white puffs. "Emma, what's happening?" Marcus whispered. "Sarah's spirit has been bound to this locket for 23 years, unable to find peace while the truth remains buried. But now that we're all here together, the man who killed her, the man who loved her, and the daughter who carries her essence, the barriers between worlds are breaking down." The locket began to glow with a soft golden light that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Outside, Dr. Hartwell's voice carried a new note of urgency. "I can see unusual light coming from inside. Whatever you're doing in there, stop it now. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Michael backed away from the windows, his face white with terror. "This isn't natural. This isn't possible. 23 years ago, you made the decision to prioritize your own life over Sarah's," Emma said, her voice taking on an eerie dual quality, as if 2 people were speaking in perfect unison. "Tonight, you have the chance to make a different choice." The front door handle rattled as someone tried to force it open. Marcus had barricaded it with a heavy dresser, but it wouldn't hold for long against determined intruders. "There's a back exit through the kitchen," Michael said, pointing toward the rear of the cabin. "It leads to the boat dock." "They've got someone covering the back," Marcus reminded him. Emma stood up, the locket still glowing in her outstretched palm. "Then we don't run, we face this." The golden light from the locket began to expand, filling the room with warmth that contrasted sharply with the supernatural cold. On the walls, the newspaper clippings that Michael had collected started to flutter, as if blown by an invisible wind. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to atone for what happened." "Atonement without truth is just elaborate self-pity," Emma replied. "Sarah doesn't want your guilt. She wants justice." The barricaded door shuddered under renewed assault from outside. Through the window, they could see Dr. Hartwell gesturing. angrily at his associates, clearly frustrated by their inability to gain quick entry. "Michael Thornfield," Emma called out, her voice now clearly carrying two distinct tones, her own and something older, more commanding. "Do you confess to causing the death of Sarah Mitchell through your reckless actions on the night of February 14th, 1999? Michael fell to his knees as if compelled by an invisible force. "Yes, I confess. I was driving drunk. I crossed the center line. Sarah died because she had to swerve to avoid hitting me." The golden light pulsed brighter. "Dr. Vincent Hartwell," Emma continued, though the man was still outside, "do you confess to falsifying medical records and concealing evidence of murder?" From beyond the door came Dr. Hartwell's shocked voice. How is she projecting her voice? Like that? How can I hear her so clearly? "Answer the question," Emma commanded, and her voice seemed to echo from every surface in the cabin and beyond. "I don't know what kind of trick this is, but I won't be intimidated by some disturbed teenager and her parlor games." The temperature dropped further, and ice began forming on every metal surface in the cabin. The newspaper clippings on Michael's wall started to move more violently, several tearing free and swirling through the air like a small tornado. "David Ashford," Emma called out, though he was miles away. "Do you confess to abandoning Sarah Mitchell when she needed you most?" Marcus watched in amazement as Emma seemed to grow taller, more imposing. The broken cast on her wrist had somehow fallen away, and she held both hands out now, the locket floating just above her palms. Suddenly, the room filled with a new presence. Marcus felt rather than saw Sarah standing beside Emma, not visible exactly, but undeniably there. The scent of her favorite perfume filled the air, and for a moment he could swear he heard her laughter. "Marcus," Emma said, turning to him, "Sarah wants you to know that she never stopped loving you. The pregnancy scared her, not because she didn't want the baby, but because she was afraid you'd think she was trying to trap you into marriage." Tears streamed down Marcus's face. "I would have raised that child as my own, no matter who the father was. She knows that now. She's seen how you've lived these past 23 years, how you've carried the guilt that wasn't yours to bear." The assault on the front door stopped suddenly. Through the window, they could see Dr. Hartwell backing away. From the cabin, his face filled with terror. His two associates looked equally disturbed, their professional composure cracking. "This is impossible," Dr. Hartwell shouted. "Dead people don't come back, don't they?" Emma replied, and her voice carried clearly to where he stood. "Then explain how I know about the safety deposit box in your name at First National Bank. Box 247. Explain how I know about the photographs you've been keeping as insurance against." "David Ashford," Dr. Hartwell's face went pale. "There's no way you could know about that. Explain how I know about the other victims, the private investigator, the morgue attendant, the courthouse clerk who got too curious about sealed records. Explain how I know about the car accident you arranged for Judge Thornfield when he started asking for a bigger cut of the hush money." Michael looked up sharply. "My father was murdered?" 3 years ago, when his conscience finally started bothering him and he threatened to go public with what he knew. Dr. Hartwell couldn't afford to lose his protector, but he also couldn't afford to let him talk. The golden light from the locket suddenly expanded outward, passing through the cabin walls and encompassing the entire area around the lake. Marcus felt a sensation like warm honey flowing through his veins, and he understood that Sarah's presence was somehow protecting all of them. Dr. Hartwell pulled out a gun, his hands shaking. "Enough of this supernatural nonsense. Come out of that cabin now, or I start shooting." "You can't hurt us anymore," Emma said calmly. "Sarah's death created a debt that the universe has been waiting 23 years to collect. That debt comes due today." The clouds overhead began to darken and swirl, despite the fact that the morning had been clear. Wind started to howl across the lake, creating waves that crashed against the shore with increasing violence. "Look at the water," Michael whispered. Marcus turned to see something extraordinary happening on Lake Morrison. The water near the shore was beginning to glow with the same golden light that emanated from the Locket. And in that glow, shapes were becoming visible, dozens of them, rising from the depths. "The victims," Emma explained. "Everyone who died. Because powerful men decided their lives were expendable. They've been waiting for someone to give them a voice." Dr. Hartwell fired his gun at the cabin, but the bullets seemed to pass harmlessly through the walls without hitting anything solid. His associates dropped their weapons and ran for their car, abandoning him as the supernatural phenomena escalated beyond anything they'd been prepared to handle. "This ends now," Emma declared. She closed her eyes and held the locket high above her head. "Sarah Mitchell calls for justice. Elena Marie Bradley calls for justice. All the unnamed victims call for justice." The golden light exploded outward, with the force of a small sun. When Marcus's vision cleared, he found himself standing not in Michael's cabin, but in a vast ethereal space filled with swirling mists and distant stars. Emma stood beside him, but she was no longer a 16-year-old girl. She appeared as she would have looked had she lived to adulthood, a woman in her 20s with Sarah's graceful bearing and Marcus's determined jaw. "Where are we?" Marcus asked. "A place between worlds," Elena replied, for that's who she clearly was now. A place where truth cannot be hidden or distorted. Michael was there too, looking around in wonder and terror. "Am I dead?" Lena said. "But you have a choice to make. You can continue living with the guilt that's been destroying you, or you can help us ensure that justice is finally served." Dr. Hartwell materialized in the misty space, no longer the composed professional, but a frightened old man clutching his useless gun. "This is a hallucination. Stress-induced psychosis. None of this is real. Reality is more flexible than you've spent your career believing," Elena told him. "Sarah's death created a wound in the fabric of the universe that has been festering for over 2 decades. That wound must be healed." Suddenly, Sarah herself appeared in the ethereal space, not as the broken young woman who had died in Willow Creek, but as she would have been had she lived. She was radiant, beautiful, filled with a peace that transcended physical existence. "Vincent," she said to Dr. Hartwell, her voice filled with sadness rather than anger, "you took an oath to do no harm. How many people have suffered because you chose money over healing?" Dr. Hartwell dropped his gun, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started as one favor, one cover-up to help a powerful family avoid scandal, but then it snowballed. And each time it became easier to choose silence over truth," Sarah continued. "Each time it became easier to see victims as obstacles rather than human beings. What do you want from me?" Sarah turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with the love he'd carried in his heart for 23 years. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where powerful men can't buy their way out of accountability. I want the families of all the victims to finally know what happened to their loved ones." Elena stepped forward, once again appearing as the teenage girl Marcus had found by the railway tracks. "Dr. Hartwell, you have one last chance to choose healing over harm. Will you help us expose the truth?" The misty space around them began to shift and change, showing scenes from the past. Sarah's last moments in the sinking car, Dr. Hartwell falsifying records, Judge Thornfield making threatening phone calls, David Ashford writing checks to ensure silence. "If I confess, if I provide evidence of everything that's been covered up, what happens to me?" Sarah's expression softened. "You'll face the consequences of your actions, but you'll also be free from the burden you've been carrying. Sometimes accountability is the first step toward redemption." Marcus watched this exchange with amazement. Even after everything that had been done to her, Sarah was offering her killer's accomplice a chance at peace. "And if I refuse?" The ethereal space darkened, and the golden light began to fade. Then you continue living as you have been, haunted by the dead, paranoid about exposure, slowly losing your humanity one compromise at a time. Dr. Hartwell looked around at the swirling mists, at the faces of victims that flickered in, and, out of visibility, at the woman whose death had started it all. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it. I'll confess to everything." The moment he spoke those words, the ethereal space began to dissolve. Marcus felt himself being pulled back to the physical world, back to the cabin by Lake Morrison. When his vision cleared, he was standing in Michael's living room. But everything had changed. The newspaper clippings on the walls had been replaced by legal documents, confessions, financial records, photographs, and correspondence that documented decades of corruption and cover-ups. Dr. Hartwell sat at Michael's desk, writing frantically, as if compelled by an invisible force. Emma stood beside the window, looking out at the lake where the golden glow was slowly fading. She was once again a 16-year-old girl with a broken wrist, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone much older. "It's over," she said simply. "The truth is finally coming to light." Marcus looked at Dr. Hartwell, who continued writing with the intensity of a man racing against time. What's he doing? Documenting everything. Names, dates, amounts, methods. Every victim, every cover-up, every payment made to ensure silence. When he's finished, there will be enough evidence to bring down everyone involved in the conspiracy. Michael walked over to where Dr. Hartwell was writing and read over his shoulder. "He's including details about my father's murder. About other deaths that were made to look like accidents. Justice doesn't pick and choose," Emma said. "If we're going to heal the wound that Sarah's death created, we have to expose all of it." As if responding to her words, Dr. Hartwell looked up from his writing. His face was haggard, but for the first time in decades, his eyes were clear. "I've documented everything I can remember," he said. "Bank account numbers, safety deposit box locations, names of everyone who was paid to stay quiet. It should be enough to reopen dozens of cases." Emma walked over and placed her hand on the stack of papers. "And you'll testify to all of this in court?" "Yes, whatever the consequences, I'll tell the truth." Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "What happens now?" Emma smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like Sarah. "Now we make sure these confessions reach the right people. And then we let justice take its course." Outside, the storm clouds were dissipating, and normal daylight was returning to Lake Morrison. But Marcus knew that nothing would ever be normal again. The truth, once unleashed, would reshape everything, not just for him and Emma, but for all the families who had been denied justice for so many years. The age of secrets was finally coming to an end. 3 hours later, Detective Kowalski stood in Michael Thornfield's cabin, staring at the mountain of evidence spread across every available surface. His weathered face showed the strain of a man trying to process revelations that would rewrite the history of his county. "Let me understand this correctly," he said, rubbing his temples. "Dr. Hartwell has confessed to falsifying autopsy reports for over 2 decades. Michael Thornfield admits to vehicular manslaughter. And you're telling me that Senator Ashford's son was paying hush money to cover up a pregnancy?" Marcus nodded from his position beside Emma on the couch. "That's just the beginning. The safety deposit box contains photographs and documents that implicate dozens of people in various cover-ups." Detective Kowalski picked up one of Dr. Hartwell's handwritten confessions. "These accusations about Judge Thornfield's death. If they're true, we're looking at multiple homicides disguised as accidents." "They're true," Dr. Hartwell said quietly, from the corner chair where he'd been sitting since finishing his marathon writing session. "I have detailed records of every payment, every favor, every threat made to maintain the conspiracy. And you're willing to testify to all of this in court?" "I am." Detective Kowalski looked at Emma with curiosity and concern. Miss Caldwell, you've been through significant trauma. Are you certain you're ready to handle what's going to happen when this information becomes public? Emma met his gaze steadily. Detective, I've been preparing for this moment my entire life, even when I didn't know it. I'm ready. The media attention alone will be overwhelming. The Ashford family has significant influence, and there will be attempts to discredit your story. Let them try, Marcus said firmly. We have documentation, financial records, and multiple confessions. The truth speaks for itself. Detective Kowalski's radio crackled with urgent chatter. He listened for a moment, then looked up with a grim expression. That was dispatch. David Ashford's private jet filed a flight plan for the Cayman Islands. About an hour ago, someone tipped him off. Michael stood up abruptly. Dr. Hartwell's associates. The two men who ran when the supernatural event started. They must have reported back to their employers. Can you stop the plane? Marcus asked. We're trying, but Ashford has significant resources and political connections. If he reaches international waters. Emma closed her eyes, her hand instinctively. Moving to the locket around her neck, he won't escape. Sarah won't let him. Detective Kowalski raised an eyebrow. Miss Caldwell, I understand you've been through trauma, but we need to rely on conventional law enforcement methods here. Sometimes conventional methods aren't enough to catch unconventional criminals, Emma replied. Give me a moment. She walked to the window overlooking the lake, where the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the water. As she stood there, the locket began to emit that familiar golden glow, though much fainter than during the morning's supernatural events. What's she doing? Detective Kowalski whispered to Marcus. Something that would be impossible to explain in a police report. Marcus replied. After several minutes, Emma turned back to them with a satisfied expression. David Ashford's plane experienced sudden engine trouble over Lake Michigan. There, being forced to make an emergency landing at Chicago O'Hare, where federal agents will be waiting. Detective Kowalski stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Because justice has momentum now. Once the truth starts coming out, it becomes harder and harder for lies to maintain their power. As if summoned by her words, Detective Kowalski's radio crackled again. All units, be advised that David Ashford has been detained at O'Hare Airport. Federal agents are en route to process him for questioning. The detective looked between Emma and his radio with bewilderment. That's quite a coincidence. There are no coincidences anymore, Emma said simply. Only consequences finally catching up with actions. Over the next several hours, the cabin became a hub of law enforcement activity. FBI agents arrived to coordinate with local police. Federal prosecutors began reviewing the evidence, and crime scene technicians photographed and cataloged every document. Dr. Hartwell had produced. Marcus watched the organized chaos with a mixture of satisfaction and surreal disbelief. After 23 years of carrying the weight of Sarah's death, the truth was finally being acknowledged by the very system that had helped bury it. Mr. Bradley, Agent Rebecca Chun of the FBI approached him during a quiet moment. We'll need extensive statements from both you and Miss Caldwell. This case is likely to become a federal matter given the interstate nature of the conspiracy and the political figures involved. Whatever you need, Marcus replied. I have to ask, some of the details in these confessions are remarkably specific for events that happened over 2 decades ago. Dr. Hartwell claims he documented everything, but memory can be unreliable after so much time. Marcus glanced at Emma, who was speaking quietly with another federal agent. Agent Chun, there are aspects of this case that go beyond conventional investigation. I'd recommend focusing on the documentary evidence and financial records, rather than trying to explain how we obtained certain information. Agent Chun studied his face carefully. Mr. Bradley, are you saying there were unconventional investigative methods involved? I'm saying that sometimes the universe has its own way of revealing truth when human systems fail. Before Agent Chun could respond, commotion erupted outside the cabin. Through the window, they could see news vans arriving, reporters setting up cameras, and the quiet lakeside location transforming into a media circus. How did they find out so quickly? Marcus asked. Detective Kowalski looked up from a phone conversation. Someone leaked preliminary information about David Ashford's arrest. The story is already breaking on national news. Emma walked over to Marcus, her expression troubled. This is what I was afraid of. Once the media gets involved, the focus shifts from justice to entertainment. What do you mean? They'll turn Sarah's story into a spectacle. The teenage pregnancy, the powerful families, the cover-up. It's everything the media loves, but they'll lose sight of the real victims. As if to prove her point, a reporter's voice carried clearly through the cabin windows. This is shaping up to be one of the biggest political scandals in decades, with allegations of murder, conspiracy, and cover-ups reaching the highest levels of state government. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. They're already treating this like some kind of soap opera. Emma placed a calming hand on his arm. That's why we need to control our own narrative. We need to make sure Sarah's voice is heard clearly, not drowned out by sensationalism. Agent Chun approached them again. Miss Caldwell, Mr. Bradley, I strongly recommend that you avoid speaking to the media until we've completed our initial investigation. Anything you say publicly could potentially complicate the prosecution. How long will that take? Emma asked. Given the scope of the conspiracy and the number of potential defendants, we're looking at months of investigation before any trials begin. Emma shook her head. That's too long. The longer we wait, the more time the remaining conspirators have to destroy evidence or coordinate their defenses. Miss Caldwell, I understand your urgency, but federal investigations follow specific protocols. And sometimes those protocols protect the very people they're supposed to investigate. Emma replied sharply. How many of David Ashford's political allies are in positions to influence this investigation? Agent Chun's expression tightened. I can assure you that the FBI conducts impartial investigations, regardless of political pressures. Can you? Because I can tell you right now that within the next 24 hours, you'll receive calls from people in Washington suggesting that this case be handled with discretion and sensitivity to national security concerns. Marcus looked at Emma with surprise. How can you know that? Because power protects power, and there are people who will do anything to prevent this conspiracy from exposing other related corruption. David Ashford wasn't operating in isolation. As if summoned by her words, Agent Chun's phone rang. She answered it, stepped away for a private conversation, then returned with a carefully neutral expression. That was my supervisor in Washington. Apparently, there are concerns about the political ramifications of this case. What kind of concerns? Marcus asked. The type that suggest we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Emma stood up. Her jaw set with determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of Sarah. Agent Chun, I'm 16 years old, but I'm not naive. I know how these things work. The powerful people implicated in this conspiracy have friends in high places who will try to minimize the fallout, Miss Caldwell. No, let me finish. For 23 years, Sarah Mitchell has been denied justice because people decided that protecting the powerful was more important than protecting the innocent. I won't let that happen again. Emma walked to the center of the room where all the law enforcement personnel could see her. Everyone here needs to understand something. This case isn't just about one drunk driving incident or one falsified autopsy. It's about a system of corruption that has been operating for decades. She pulled out the locket, which immediately began to glow with that familiar golden light. And that system is being watched now by forces that don't care about political considerations or career implications. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and several of the federal agents stepped back in alarm. Detective Kowalski, who had witnessed the morning's supernatural events, remained calm but alert. "Miss Caldwell," Agent Chun said carefully, "what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that this investigation will proceed with complete transparency and thoroughness, regardless of pressure from Washington. I'm suggesting that every person implicated in this conspiracy will face appropriate consequences. And I'm suggesting that anyone who tries to obstruct justice will discover that some powers transcend political influence." Dr. Hartwell looked up from the corner where he'd been quietly reviewing his confessions. "She's right, Agent Chun. You have no idea how deep this conspiracy goes or how many people have died to protect it. If you try to handle this with conventional political calculations, you'll become part of the cover-up." "Are you threatening federal agents?" Emma's expression softened, and the supernatural cold in the room began to warm. "I'm not threatening anyone, Agent Chun. I'm simply explaining that the universe has a way of ensuring that truth emerges, regardless of human attempts to suppress it." She turned to address the entire room. "Sarah Mitchell died because powerful people decided her life was less important than their reputations. Her unborn daughter died because those same people couldn't bear the inconvenience of accountability. For over 2 decades, other innocent people have died to maintain that lie." The Locket's glow intensified, and Marcus could swear he felt Sarah's presence in the room, not angry or vengeful, but determined and unwavering. "Today that ends," Emma continued. "Today we choose truth over convenience, justice over politics, and the rights of victims over the privileges of power." Agent Chun looked around the room at her fellow investigators, many of whom appeared genuinely moved by Emma's words. "Miss Caldwell, I want to assure you that the FBI is committed to following the evidence wherever it leads." "Good, because the evidence leads to some very uncomfortable places for some very important people." Outside, the media presence was growing larger and more intrusive. Helicopters circled overhead, satellite trucks lined the normally quiet Lake Road, and reporters were attempting to interview anyone who would speak to them. "We can't stay here much longer," Detective Kowalski observed. "This location is compromised." Marcus looked at Emma. "Where do we go? My house isn't safe if powerful people want us silenced." Emma smiled mysteriously. "I know a place where we'll be protected. Somewhere that has special significance for this case." "Where?" "The cemetery where Sarah is buried. It's time for us to visit her grave and let her know that justice is finally being served." Agent Chun frowned. "Miss Caldwell, cemetery isn't exactly a secure location for federal witnesses." "Agent Chun," Emma replied, her green eyes reflecting depths far beyond her 16 years. "You're about to learn that some places offer protection that goes far beyond what any security detail can provide." As they prepared to leave the cabin, Marcus took one last look at the evidence-covered walls. 23 years of lies were finally being exposed, but he had the feeling that their journey toward justice was just beginning. The most powerful conspirators were still free, and they would not go down without a fight. But as he watched Emma carefully place Sarah's locket around her neck, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2 decades: hope. The truth was finally stronger than the lies, and no amount of money or political influence could change that now. Greenwood Cemetery lay silent under the pale evening sky, its weathered headstones casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. Marcus hadn't been here since Sarah's funeral 23 years ago, and walking through the wrought iron gates felt like stepping into a photograph of his younger self's worst nightmare. Emma walked beside him with quiet confidence, leading them toward a section of the cemetery she'd never visited, but somehow knew intimately. Agent Chun and Detective Kowalski followed at a respectful distance, their professional skepticism warring with what they'd witnessed at the lake cabin. "There," Emma said, pointing to a modest granite headstone beneath an old oak tree. "That's Where they buried her. Marcus approached Sarah's grave with trembling legs. The headstone was simple, elegant. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1980 to 1999, beloved daughter. No mention of the pregnancy, no acknowledgement of the life that had been lost along with hers. She's not really here, you know, Emma said softly, standing beside the grave. Her spirit has been tethered to the locket all this time, unable to find peace while the truth remained buried. Marcus knelt beside the headstone, his fingers tracing Sarah's name in the cold stone. I used to come here every week for the first year after she died. I'd sit right here and tell her about my day, ask her what I should do, beg her to give me some sign that she was okay. She heard you, Emma assured him, every word. Agent Chun checked her watch and scanned the perimeter of the cemetery. Miss Caldwell, we're very exposed here. If the remaining conspirators decide to take direct action, they won't attack us here, Emma interrupted. This is consecrated ground, and Sarah's presence is strongest in this place. Some boundaries even desperate people won't cross. As if to emphasize her point, the temperature around Sarah's grave began to warm despite the February evening. The frost on nearby headstones melted away, and small flowers, winter jasmine and early crocuses, began pushing through the thawed earth. Detective Kowalski stared at the impossible blooms. How is that happening? It's still winter. Love transcends seasons, Emma explained. Sarah's love for Marcus, her love for the daughter she never got to hold, even her love for the truth that was stolen from her. It's all been growing stronger over the years, waiting for this moment. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out Sarah's promise ring, the one Emma had given him at the hospital. I've been carrying this guilt for so long. Sarah, I blamed myself for that fight we had, for letting you drive off angry into the storm. Emma knelt beside him, her hand resting on the warming earth above Sarah's grave. She wants you to know that the last thing she thought about wasn't the argument. It was the life you were going to build together, the house you'd talked about buying, the children you'd raise, the future that seemed so bright and possible. Tears streamed down Marcus's face. And then it was all taken away by someone too. Selfish and cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. Not taken away, Emma corrected gently. Postponed. Sarah found a way to keep her promise to you, Marcus. She found a way to come back and make sure that the truth finally emerged. Agent Chun's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her expression growing grave. We have a problem. David Ashford's legal team has filed emergency injunctions to suppress all evidence related to the case. They're claiming the confessions were obtained through coercion and that Dr. Hartwell is mentally unstable. What does that mean? Marcus asked. It means they're trying to shut down the investigation before it can proceed to trial. If they're successful, all of Dr. Hartwell's testimony could be thrown out. Emma stood up, her jaw set with determination. Then we need to make sure they're not successful. Miss Caldwell, this is a legal matter now. It has to be resolved through the courts. Agent Chun, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. This conspiracy has survived for over 2 decades because it's been protected by legal technicalities and political influence. Conventional justice has already failed once. The golden light from the locket began to intensify, and the air around Sarah's grave shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Marcus felt a familiar presence, growing stronger, more tangible than it had been even during the supernatural events at the cabin. What's happening? Detective Kowalski asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Sarah's spirit is no longer bound by the limitations that kept her trapped between worlds, Emma explained. The truth has given her power, and she's using that power to ensure justice is served. Suddenly, Agent Chun's phone rang with an urgent call from FBI headquarters. She answered it, listened intently, then hung up with a stunned expression. That was my director. Apparently, Every computer system at David Ashford's law firm just crashed simultaneously, and all their backup servers have been corrupted. The emergency injunctions they filed have mysteriously disappeared from the court's electronic filing system. Emma smiled. Technology is surprisingly vulnerable to spiritual interference. That's impossible. Law firms have multiple backup systems. Cybersecurity protocols. Agent Chun, you're trying to apply rational explanations to supernatural phenomena. Sometimes the universe has its own IT department. Marcus watched this exchange with amazement. Even in death, Sarah was fighting for justice with the same determination she'd shown in life. What happens now? Now we wait for the other conspirators to reveal themselves, Emma said. Desperation makes people careless, and we've just raised the stakes considerably. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the cemetery. Black SUVs were pulling through the gates, their occupants moving with military precision. Federal marshals? Detective Kowalski asked, reaching for his radio. Agent Chun shook her head grimly. Wrong type of vehicles. Those aren't law enforcement. The SUVs surrounded the cemetery, and armed men in tactical gear began taking positions behind headstones and mausoleums. They moved with the efficiency of professional soldiers, not the restraint of law enforcement officers. Private military. Contractors, Agent Chun identified. The kind of people who ask questions after they shoot, not before. Marcus instinctively moved to shield Emma, but she remained calm, her hand resting on the locket around her neck. They can't hurt us here, she said confidently. This ground is protected. A man in an expensive suit emerged from one of the SUVs, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Even at a distance, Marcus could see the family resemblance, the same aristocratic features, the same bearing of inherited privilege. Senator William Ashford, Agent Chun identified quietly. David's father. The senator approached the grave site with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and influence. His voice carried clearly across the cemetery as he called out to them. Miss Caldwell, Mr. Bradley, you've caused quite enough trouble. It's time to end this charade. Emma stepped forward, unafraid despite being surrounded by armed men. Senator Ashford, your son killed an innocent woman and her unborn child. Then he paid other people to cover up his crime. That's not a charade. That's murder. My son made a mistake 23 years ago when he was a young man. He spent his entire adult life trying to make amends for that error in judgment by paying hush money and having people killed. Marcus stood up, his anger overriding his fear. By letting Michael Thornfield carry the guilt for an accident your son caused, Senator Ashford's composure cracked slightly. You have no idea what you're meddling with. The stability of this state's government, the careers of dozens of good people, international business relationships worth billions of dollars, all of it is threatened by your obsession with ancient history. Ancient history? Emma's voice took on that dual quality again, as if Sarah's spirit was speaking through her. Tell that to all the families who never learned what really happened to their loved ones. Tell that to the private investigators who died in accidents when they got too close to the truth. The senator gestured to his men, who began moving closer to the gravesite. This ends now. You'll come with us voluntarily, or my associates will help you reconsider. But as the armed contractors stepped forward, something extraordinary happened. The ground around Sarah's grave began to glow with that familiar golden light, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath became visible in white clouds. The contractors stopped abruptly as frost began forming on their weapons and tactical gear. Several of them stumbled backward as if pushed by an invisible force. What the hell? One of them muttered, looking around in confusion. Senator Ashford's face went pale. Dr. Hartwell warned me there might be unusual complications. But I didn't believe him. Believe him now, Emma said. her voice echoing strangely in the supernatural cold. "Your family's crimes created a debt to the universe that has been accumulating interest for over 2 decades. That debt comes due tonight." The golden light expanded outward from Sarah's grave, washing over the entire cemetery. As it passed over each headstone, Marcus could swear he saw translucent figures rising from the earth, dozens of spirits, all looking toward the confrontation with expressions of solemn purpose. "The dead don't forget," Emma continued, her eyes now glowing with the same golden light. "They've been waiting patiently for justice, but their patience is at an end." One of the contractors raised his weapon, but the moment he tried to aim it at Emma, the gun crumbled to rust in his hands. The same thing happened to the other armed men. Their weapons simply disintegrated, leaving them defenseless against forces they couldn't understand or fight. Senator Ashford backed away, his political composure completely shattered. "This isn't possible. Dead people don't come back for revenge." "Not revenge," Emma corrected, advancing toward him with slow, deliberate steps. "Justice. There's a difference, though I understand why people like you have trouble telling them." Apart, Agent Chen and Detective Kowalski watched in amazement as the supernatural drama unfolded. The federal agent pulled out her phone and began recording, understanding that what she was witnessing would never be believed without documentation. "Senator Ashford," Emma continued, her voice carrying the authority of cosmic judgment, "you have a choice. You can confess to your role in covering up your son's crimes and face earthly justice, or you can continue denying the truth and face a different kind of accountability." The spirits rising from the cemetery graves began moving closer, their translucent forms becoming more solid and defined. Marcus recognized some of them from the newspaper clippings in Michael's cabin, victims of accidents that were really murders. People who had died to protect the Ashford family's secrets. I can't." The senator stammered, his usual political eloquence deserting him completely. "Then they will," Emma said simply. The spirits surrounded Senator Ashford and his remaining men, their presence so overwhelming that several of the contractors fell to their knees in terror. The senator himself was shaking uncontrollably, his expensive suit providing no protection against the supernatural cold. "Please," he whispered. "What do you want?" Sarah's spirit materialized directly in front of him, no longer the broken young woman who had died in Willow Creek, but a figure of righteous purpose with eyes that seemed to see directly into his soul. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where power can't buy immunity from consequences," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the cemetery like a bell. "I want justice for all the people who died, because your family valued money more than human life." Senator Ashford fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the spiritual pressure surrounding him. "I'll confess. I'll tell them everything. Just make it stop." Emma approached him, her expression softening slightly. "The truth will set you free, Senator. Even you." As Senator Ashford began his confession to Agent Chun's recording device, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The 23-year journey from Sarah's death to this moment of accountability had finally reached its end. But as he looked at Emma, glowing with supernatural purpose beside Sarah's grave, he realized that while one chapter was ending, another was just beginning. The girl he'd found frozen by the railway tracks had become something far more powerful than either of them had imagined, a force for justice that would reshape not just their lives, but the entire corrupt system that had thrived in darkness for far too long. The age of secrets was truly over. The age of consequences had begun. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the federal courthouse in Indianapolis, watching as the last of the conspirators received their sentences. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members of victims, and law enforcement officials who had worked tirelessly to unravel the web of corruption that had strangled justice for over 2 decades. Judge Patricia Williams read the final verdict with the gravity befitting the magnitude of the crimes. David Ashford, for the charges of vehicular homicide, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and accessory to multiple murders. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. David Ashford, once a powerful political figure destined for Congress, sat slumped at the defendant's table. The months since his arrest had aged him dramatically. His expensive suits couldn't hide the hollow look of a man who had finally been held accountable for his actions. Dr. Vincent Hartwell, who had cooperated fully with the prosecution, received 15 years for his role in the cover-up. Despite his confession and testimony against the other conspirators, the judge made it clear that his medical oath had been grievously violated. Senator William Ashford faced charges in a separate trial, but his political career was already over. The recordings Agent Chun had made at the cemetery, combined with the mountain of evidence they'd uncovered, had led to his expulsion from the Senate and criminal charges for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Michael Thornfield received the lightest sentence, 10 years with the possibility of parole in 7, due to his cooperation and the genuine remorse he'd shown throughout the proceedings. His testimony had been crucial in establishing the timeline of events and the scope of the cover-up. As the court session ended, Marcus felt a hand slip into his. Emma stood beside him, no longer the broken 16-year-old he'd found by the railway tracks. The months of legal proceedings had given her a sense of purpose and closure that showed in her confident bearing. "It's really over," she said softly. "This part is," Marcus agreed, "but Sarah can finally rest now." They walked out of the courthouse together, past the cluster of reporters and cameras. Marcus had learned to navigate the media attention that had surrounded the case, though he still preferred the quiet dignity of letting the facts speak for themselves. Outside, Detective Kowalski was waiting by his car. "Marcus, Emma, I wanted to catch you before you left. How are you doing, Detective?" Emma asked with genuine warmth. "Better than I expected, considering I've had to revise my understanding of how the universe works." Kowalski smiled ruefully. "I've been thinking about retiring early. After witnessing what happened at that cemetery, regular police work seems almost mundane." Marcus chuckled. "I can understand that feeling. There's something else," Kowalski continued. "The department has decided to reopen 17 cold cases based on the evidence that came out during the trial. Families are finally going to get answers about what happened to their loved ones." Emma's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful news. It's because of what you two started. The courage to seek truth, even when it seemed impossible, that's inspired a lot of people to ask questions they'd given up on asking." Agent Chun appeared from the courthouse steps, still looking somewhat bewildered by the case that had redefined her understanding of federal law enforcement. "Mr. Bradley, Miss Caldwell, I wanted to thank you both. This case has led to the largest corruption investigation in the state's history. We've identified over 30 cases where evidence was suppressed or falsified to protect wealthy defendants." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we continue the work. The Ashford family's financial records led us to a network of corrupt officials across 3 states. We'll be prosecuting cases for years to come." Emma squeezed Marcus's hand. "And the foster care system? What about the other children in situations like mine?" Agent Chun's expression softened. "Funny you should ask. Your story has prompted a complete overhaul of the state's child protective services. New oversight protocols, mandatory reporting, systems, unannounced inspections, the works." "Good," Emma said firmly. "No child should have to endure what I went through." As the law enforcement officials departed, Marcus and Emma found themselves alone on the courthouse steps. The late summer afternoon was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the cold February morning when their journey had begun. "Marcus," Emma said, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "The dreams have changed. For months, I've been having visions of Sarah, but they're different now. She's not trapped or restless anymore. She's at peace. Marcus felt a bittersweet mixture of joy and loss. Does that mean ... It means her spirit is free to move on. The locket no longer binds her to this world. Emma reached up and removed Sarah's locket from around her neck. The gold seemed to pulse with one final gentle glow before settling into ordinary metal. "She wanted me to give this back to you," Emma said, placing it in Marcus's palm, "with a message." "What message?" Emma's voice took on a gentle echo, as if Sarah's spirit was speaking one last time through her. "She says thank you for never giving up on the truth. Thank you for giving her daughter a chance at the life she never had. And thank you for proving that love really is stronger than death." Marcus closed his fingers around the locket, feeling tears sting his eyes. "What about you, Emma? What happens now?" "Now I get to live the life Elena never had the chance to experience. I start college in the fall, pre-law, with a focus on victims' rights advocacy." Marcus smiled through his tears. "Sarah would be proud. She is proud. And so are you, Dad." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond biology or legal definitions. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had officially adopted Emma through the family court system. Whether she was truly his biological daughter or simply a girl who needed a father, the bond between them had grown into something unbreakable. "Are you ready to go home?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Emma said, linking her arm through his. "I'm ready." They walked toward Marcus's truck, parked under the shade of an old oak tree. As they drove away from the courthouse, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that February morning when he'd found a frozen girl beside the railway tracks. The house they returned to was different too. No longer the shrine to past grief that Marcus had maintained for over 2 decades. It had become a home filled with life and purpose. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator. Her textbooks were scattered across the kitchen table, and her laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for far too long. That evening, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset. Emma was reading a book for her summer college prep course, while Marcus worked on rebuilding an old motorcycle he'd found in the garage, a project that would have seemed pointless during his years of isolation, but now felt like preparation for adventures yet to come. "Marcus," Emma said, looking up from her book, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Sarah had lived? If she'd been able to tell you about the pregnancy that night?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think about it sometimes, but I've learned that dwelling on alternate histories just steals energy from the present." "Do you think you would have been happy together?" "I think we would have tried to be. But happiness isn't guaranteed, even under the best circumstances. What matters is that we would have faced whatever came together." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That's what we're doing now, isn't it? Facing whatever comes together." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "And that makes all the difference." As darkness fell, Emma went inside to finish her homework. Marcus remained on the porch, holding Sarah's locket and thinking about the strange journey that had brought them all to this point. A gentle breeze stirred the evening air, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden Emma had planted in the backyard. For just a moment, Marcus could swear he smelled Sarah's perfume mixed with the floral fragrance. He looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky and whispered, "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." The breeze grew stronger for a moment, rustling the leaves of the oak tree in what sounded almost like laughter. Then it faded, leaving Marcus with a sense of profound peace. Inside the house, Emma called out, "Dad, can you help me with this calculus problem?" Marcus smiled, slipped the locket into his pocket, and stood up to join his daughter. The past had finally been laid to rest, justice had been served, and the future stretched ahead of them filled with possibility. The railway tracks where his journey had begun still ran through the countryside, but Marcus no longer walked them in solitude. Sometimes he and Emma would hike along the abandoned rails together, talking about her plans for college, His ideas for expanding the motorcycle restoration hobby into a small business, and the foundation they were establishing to help other foster children find permanent homes. The tracks that had once represented his endless circle of grief had become a symbol of forward momentum, a reminder that even the most unlikely journeys could lead to destinations worth reaching. 1 year after the trial, Emma graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. Her speech focused on the power of truth to heal communities and the importance of never giving up on justice, even when the odds seemed impossible. In the audience, Marcus watched with pride as his daughter, for that's what she truly was now, in every way that mattered, spoke with the confidence and wisdom of someone who had faced darkness and emerged into light. After the ceremony, they visited Sarah's grave together. The headstone had been replaced with a new one that read, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, 1980 to 1999. Beloved daughter and mother, her truth lives on. Emma placed white roses on the grave while Marcus stood quietly, no longer weighed down by guilt or regret. The supernatural events that had brought them together seemed like a distant dream, but the love that had motivated Sarah's spirit to reach across the divide between life and death remained as real and powerful as ever. She's not here anymore, Emma said softly, but she's everywhere. Marcus nodded, understanding. Sarah's influence lived on in the justice that had been served, the corruption that had been exposed, the foster care reforms that would protect other children, and most importantly, in the young woman who carried her best qualities forward into the future. As they walked away from the cemetery together, Marcus realized that the story that had begun with death and loss had ultimately become a story about life and hope. Sometimes the most profound healing required facing the deepest wounds. Sometimes justice demanded patience that spanned decades. And sometimes love really was strong enough to transcend the boundaries between worlds. The girl he'd found frozen beside the tracks had saved him just as much as he'd saved her. Together they had proven that truth, no matter how long buried, would eventually find its way to the surface. And in the end, that was Sarah's greatest gift, not just the return of his capacity to love, but the knowledge that some bonds are truly unbreakable, some promises are kept regardless of death, and some stories never really end. They just transform into new beginnings. The railway tracks stretched endlessly in both directions, but Marcus and Emma were no longer bound by the past or afraid of the future. They walked forward together, ready for whatever adventures awaited them down the line. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.